Today is February 22nd, 2021. I am Daniel Erickson, and today I'm interviewing Dr. Harbour Winn over Zoom about Oklahoma Humanities and his interactions with the organization. So first of all, thank you for joining me here today.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so to get started with this, just tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, I have a PhD in English literature from the University of Oregon, and I have taught at Oklahoma City University as a professor. I'm now a professor emeritus in English. For about 17 years, I led a different life. I decided I wanted to do other things too. And through OCU's master's degree program in Montessori education, I got my Montessori master's degree and my American Montessori Society certification. And for 17 years, taught full-time at a Montessori school in Oklahoma City, Westminster School. This was in large part in conjunction with my three children's attendance for 10 years from preschool through 8th grade at Westminster. So I taught at Oklahoma City University before that and for about 5 years. And then after that for about 20 years, full-time. And I think the Montessori experience was one of the most important ones in my life in really altering the way I looked at students and the way I dealt with university students in the classroom. At Oklahoma City University, I founded and directed a center that was endowed, the Center for Interpersonal Studies through Film and Literature. And our focus was to build an international and distinguished American independent film DVD collection for the Oklahoma City University Library, which still exists. We focused on bringing a major American poet to the Oklahoma City University and Oklahoma City community area with large participation from high school students and high school English teachers and librarians, as well as the general public. We interviewed poets. Most of those interviews were published in the Oklahoma Humanities magazine and newspaper before the magazine. I directed a international film series for 35 years at Oklahoma City University. It still exists. It's in its 38th or 39th year now. And we brought 8 to 10 international films to the Oklahoma City community on Sunday afternoons. All of these events were always free to the public. That was part of the understanding of the individual who endowed the center. I continued to teach. My role would be to, half of my job was to direct the center, half of it was to teach in the English department and in the film department and in the Montessori theory department. And I continued to do that until now. COVID has stopped things. We went to Singapore with a Master of Liberal Arts program. We went to Taiwan with the master's education degree in Montessori education. I've been involved with Oklahoma City, with Oklahoma Humanities since the early 1980s and have been involved in many, many of their programs. I'm not sure, Daniel, is that enough introduction?
Oh yeah, that's fine.
I'm married, have 3 children and 7 grandchildren.
Yeah. Yeah, so continuing on with this development of who you are, could you tell me a little bit about your growing up in early education, like going up and through high school?
My own personal?
Yeah.
Born in New Orleans, my family moved to Houston by the time I was starting kindergarten. And so I went through, I really think of Houston as my home, though New Orleans is my birthplace. But I grew up, my roots are Catholic. So I grew up in a strong Roman Catholic family, went to Roman Catholic. I was not out of the Roman Catholic ghetto until graduate school. I went to an all-boys Catholic high school. I went to a Jesuit university. I then escaped that or was liberated from that. I value very much that. It gave me very strong foundation of values. And I don't disparage that in any way. I'm just in a different place myself, but it gave me a strong foundation.
Okay. And in these years where you were in Catholic schools and stuff, what sort of role did the humanities play in your education, and like what was your view of the humanities during that time period?
Well, English, I mean, literature, drama, um, theology, philosophy, they were very much involved. History in my education, my values, what I really moved to. I mean, my parents thought I should be a medical doctor. After one semester in organic chemistry in college, I decided I wanted to be what I really wanted to be, an English major. And so for the last 3.5 years of college, I was an English major. I think that's when I really began to decide who I was and who I wanted to be.
Yeah, all right. And did you go to grad school right out of undergraduate?
Yes, I did. This was in the late 60s and the early 70s. Don't know if this is pertinent, but I was very much involved in the civil rights movement and the questioning the legality and the morality of the Vietnam War. I was drafted. I refused to go. I spent about a year, and finally, after many essays and many interviews, like with psychiatrists, my draft board determined that I was a conscientious objector. And then I spent 2 years of alternative service working in a federal housing project in Houston with senior citizens. And I think that was a very pivotal experience in my valuing the humanities and seeing the application of that to all of my life and to the values that I would live my life by.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Then I had degrees already, but master's degree and a bachelor's degree both in English, but I wanted to go to another region of the country. And I was married at that point, and my wife and I we went to Oregon, to Eugene, Oregon, to University of Oregon. And that is a place where I have lived, where I was not in a minority in the mindset. And that experience, those 3 years at the University of Oregon with my PhD program, was just incredibly liberating time, and deepened my understanding of literature and philosophical issues. I've always looked at literature with the strong background in philosophy and theology I had with Jesuit education. I've always looked particularly at the humanities, or at literature in the humanities, in relation to philosophical and theological issues.
Is that sort of what you studied or like focused on in your PhD program?
Well, my PhD program was incredibly, it offered me many choices. It wasn't just an ironclad lockstep, you had to do this and then that and then that. It was a very sophisticated and advanced program for its time. But I don't know that it, I mean, I had great professors who definitely looked at literature beyond just narrow schools of criticism. In fact, today, I think that too often in graduate school, students are asked to focus on theory and different schools of criticism, and sometimes at the expense of reading literature.
Okay. Could you sort of expand on what exactly that means?
Well, you know, when you are in literature courses, even at the undergraduate level today, but at the graduate level especially, then you could be focusing whole semester on deconstructive theory or neo-colonial theory or things of that nature. And I think the role of a teacher, and certainly a person involved in the humanities, is to find ways to speak beyond academic jargon. You know, if you're going to go and talk to the public in a humanities program, and you talk about Freudian theory and deconstructive theory and feminist theory and all of that, I think that they're going to be confused about what you're talking about. I think that I don't disvalue different theoretical studies and approaches. They're very important, but they can't be the primary focus through which you communicate. I think you have to communicate through the literature itself as a person in literature, whether it would be history, it'd be different, but you have to focus through the literature itself and implicitly, indirectly, and sometimes bring to a conscious reflection, theoretical ideas and principles. You can't start with the theory. You've got to go through the literature, which is what people read for. I think it's what we all should read for, whether we have PhDs in English or not.
Right, yeah, that's really interesting. And so after you got your PhD, what did you do after getting out of your PhD program?
Well, I mean, as always, you know, the complication in the humanities is looking for a job. But I did get a job at Oklahoma City University, and I moved here, and that was in January of '75, and we're still here. So I looked for a job, and I began to teach at Oklahoma City University, teaching courses in composition and courses in American literature. But also, one of the really wonderful experiences I had, maybe one of the most wonderful teaching experiences I've ever had. At that point, Oklahoma City University required students to take a 6-hour course that was called Search for Meaning and Value. And it was team taught by a person from English, myself, a person from theology, and a person from philosophy. So the three of us, and we had 3 tutors, 3 upper division tutors. It was a sophomore level course. And we would develop a theme that we would trace throughout the school year. They would take it for the entire year. And the theme, then we would determine readings in both religion, philosophy, and literature that would interconnect, or at least our conception was they would. And more often than not, it worked very, very well. And so students had the experience of 3 different teachers for 3 different disciplines. And that was a 6-hour required course for their entire sophomore year. And that lasted about 4 years before administrators began to question the cost involved in putting 3 professors in 1 course. You know, all that kind of stuff that we still live with.
Mm-hmm.
But that was one of the most exciting teaching experiences I've ever had. Because all 3 of us would be present at all the classes, you see. We would take turns teaching, and then we would have sessions where all 3 of us would be, you know, sitting together, and the students would be questioning us. The students had to integrate the 3 areas, and our role was to give them a background in each of the areas and suggest directions for their ways of integrating. And by the end of the year, they had to write a long paper called their worldview paper. And it had to show in what ways what we had studied in each of the disciplines, how it related or did not relate to their emerging and developing worldview.
That's really cool. Sounds like a really interesting class.
Most students liked it. Some didn't, to be honest. It was a demanding course. And sometimes other departments don't like their students to be in a course that requires so much effort. They would rather them just to be focused on the area of their department. So
Mhm.
there, lots of interesting tension, which can be productive or not, goes on.
Yeah. And so uh, you mentioned earlier that you taught for a while and then decided that you wanted to do something else after a bit. So how long did you teach at uh, Oklahoma City University?
Well, I taught there for 5 years, and that the my children had begun. My children had begun to grow. I have three, and they had started school, and I wanted to be an involved father, involved parent, and so I arranged my university schedule so I could be a volunteer parent on Friday mornings in the Montessori classrooms that my two oldest children were in, and in the language area. And I was very interested in linguistics, the acquisition of language, but not just the acquisition of the ability to be able to read, but I think true literacy involves the ability to make meaning for yourself. And reading is certainly a skill that is important, but there are oral cultures that are incredibly literate in their ability to make meaning and understanding about life. So that incredibly engaging experience on every Friday morning for a couple of years, I began to take the Montessori graduate courses at Oklahoma City University. It was easy for me to do that because as a faculty person, I could take them at virtually no cost, just student fees. And at the end of the time that when I was completing that, I decided, gosh, it's more exciting to be working with young children uh, in in the Montessori approach to education than with college undergraduates. And so for 17 years, I taught full time at Westminster School. Now, to enable our family to survive, I worked as an adjunct at OCU. But then after 17 years, I had this opportunity. Someone was going to endow a center at OCU, and there was space in the English department. And so I decided that I had other lives to live. And so I returned to university education. It was you always have to give up what you love for what you love, if you're fortunate. And so I had to give up what I loved for what I loved, and I went back to the university. But I continued part-time at Westminster School for 5 years. But no part-time job that you love is part-time. And I was too exhausted. So I finally had to give up the Montessori entirely, although I continued to teach in the graduate program at OCU. So Montessori's never really left my life.
Yeah. Could you explain to me what the Montessori education approach is?
Well, Maria Montessori was the first Italian woman to become a medical doctor. This is back at the turn of the century, the 1900s. And she focused on children that the Italian government did not regard as educable. They were mostly impoverished children from the slums of Rome. And she founded the Casa dei Bambini, the house for children, the children's house. And that approach began to attract respect from the Italian government when the children that were not regarded as educable began to excel. And it's a method of education that everyone is not on the same thing at the same time. It's a focus on creating incredibly rich concrete materials through which children act upon and act with those materials in constructing understanding and knowledge. And so in a Montessori classroom, there might be 20 children, and each of them might be working independently on different projects. And the teacher's role is to be more an observer and to give lessons when the teacher observes a new lesson is appropriate for a child, or a child is wanting to move forward. So in a traditional Montessori school has multi-ages, 3 to 6 year olds together, 6 to 9 year olds together, 9 to 12 year olds together, no grades 1, 2, 3. And I've had one of my grandchildren go through a Montessori school in New Orleans, Louisiana, in that very context. He was with the same teacher for 3 years, for preschool, kindergarten, a different teacher for 3 years for what you or I might traditionally think of as grades 1, 2, and 3, etc. So, and in Montessori education, the humanities are really central. Montessori thought that children at a very young age should begin to study the history of civilizations, the history of the earth. Timelines are used, the history of life on earth, the history of the fundamental needs of people, whether it's homes, whether it's shelter, food, clothing, defense, spirituality, looking at different people across time and place in terms of a standard set of, say, 9 or 10 fundamental needs, both physical and spiritual or psychological needs. And one of the involvements with Oklahoma Humanities when I was at Westminster School is we had grants 4 years in a row on the study of civilizations. And by that point, I had moved to the 6 to 9 year old group, and we would begin with the study of Egypt, and over a couple of years, we would get to the modern world. And actually, we began with prehistoric people, but we had university professors from OCU come and talk to the students. And I was thinking today in preparing for this, like if you're studying medieval Europe, and the philosophy professor from OCU who came and spoke with the students talked about the role of the knight, and that a knight had to swear loyalty to his king as well as to his God. And it was a Catholic world at that point. And so he raised a question, and then students would have to write an essay, and an essay might mean 3 or 4 pages, but on what you would do if your king asked you to do what you felt your God would not want you to do. And the student would have to respond to that and give examples from their own life or the observation of their parents or their grandparents or other people that they knew. So, and that was an incredibly moving experience, those 4 years with those grants from Oklahoma Humanities to Westminster School. So the humanities has even been brought to younger children, younger elementary age children. It works.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, and so from there, once you finished up with your Montessori teachings, you said that you became the director of a center.
Center for Interpersonal Studies through Film and Literature.
Yeah, could you tell me a bit about that?
Well, I already had been directing an international film series, the OCU Film Institute, and that Film Institute was funded by grants primarily from Oklahoma Humanities for the first 14 years. And in fact, at the 25th anniversary of Oklahoma Humanities, it was designated one of the 4 outstanding projects of the first 25 years of Oklahoma Humanities. But the Film Institute I mentioned earlier showed international films to the public. This is before DVDs, before Blockbuster Video. This is before, HBO or Amazon Prime. And if you wanted to see an international film, you probably had to go outside of Oklahoma City to see it. So we would rent 16 millimeter films and show them on a projector, 16 millimeter projector. And so in fact, the benefactor who founded or endowed the Center for Interpersonal Studies had been going to the OCU Film Institute for many years because it started in the early 1980s. And the Center for Interpersonal Studies didn't start till about 1997. But the OCU Film Institute became part of the Center for Interpersonal Studies. We also focused on bringing a distinguished poet. We brought, as of now, 7 different US poet laureates were brought every April. 1 poet each April. people from Robert Pinsky to Billy Collins to Natasha Trethewey, the current poet laureate Joy Harjo. But they would come for 2 or 3 days. They would give several public lectures that were open to everyone. The Oklahoma Council for the Teachers of English and the Oklahoma Writing Project would often schedule their spring conference day with their high school students and middle school students in some instances on the day the poet was there or giving a public reading. And so the campus would be filled with high school and some middle school students and teachers. And then the general public and OCU faculty and students and administrators. But, and that poet would be here. And those grants were always mini grants funded by Oklahoma Humanities to bring this major distinguished poet to the campus and to Oklahoma City. There was always an interview. And for the first 16 or 17 years, that interview appeared in the Oklahoma Humanities magazine. We, in addition, would collaborate with other groups on campus and in the city to bring major speakers to Oklahoma City, from Archbishop Desmond Tutu to Jane Goodall to many, many people, distinguished people from many different areas of the humanities. The playwright Edward Albee came. I think 4 different Nobel Peace Prize winners came. Elie Wiesel came, the author of Night. So the center would work to bring internationally acclaimed and nationally acclaimed speakers to campus. Bill Moyers came, did the interviews with Joseph Campbell in The Power of Myth. So the center was involved with bringing films. A documentary series was started in addition to the fictional feature-length films, the poets, building the film collection in the library there. I'm not sure what else to say. I mean, many other programs, but those are some of the main ones.
Yeah, that all sounds really interesting. And so, and you're talking about these last 2 subjects, it sounds to me a lot like your first interactions with Oklahoma Humanities were as a grant recipient. Is that correct?
Actually, my first interaction with Oklahoma Humanities was, I believe, it could have been the early elementary grants. I don't think so though, no. My first interaction, I can't remember exactly what my first interaction was, but I was asked to go with the program director, that position within Oklahoma Humanities. His name was Peter Caldwell. And I was asked to go with him and 2 librarians to a national seminar that the American Library Association, in conjunction with the National Endowment for the Humanities, they were jointly together sponsoring a program called Let's Talk About It, introducing it to the nation. And the 50 states and probably some territories all could send a team of a humanities scholar, a humanities council person, and 2 librarians. I think one was on the West Coast, one was on the East Coast. I think I went to the East Coast. No, I went to the West Coast. And so I was there for a long 4-day weekend, learning about the Let's Talk About It approach, and then returned to Oklahoma. And the 4 of us were instrumental, along with the other people at Oklahoma Humanities, with beginning the program called Let's Talk About It in Oklahoma. And that's one of the flagship programs of Oklahoma Humanities. It continues to be.
Yeah, could you tell me about the Let's Talk About It program and sort of what it entails?
Well, the Let's Talk About It program is a book discussion series, but it is a book discussion series that involves input from a humanities scholar. So it's roughly a 2-hour program, and the humanities scholar, someone who has at least a master's degree in one of the humanities disciplines, he or she delivers about a 45-minute lecture, provides discussion questions in advance on a particular reading, a particular book title. And the participants have all borrowed those books in advance. Oklahoma Humanities would purchase the books, and the books were always included in a series theme. Most of the series themes would be a 5-book series. So the group would meet, it varied. Sometimes they would take 5 months. They would one meeting a month. More often it was probably every other week, but the groups would come together and the humanities scholar would provide the lecture with the discussion questions, suggestions. And after that opening presentation, there was always snacks, food, and people would break up into to eat for a few minutes and then go into small group discussion sessions. And each group was led by a discussion leader that Oklahoma Humanities provided discussion training for. And so a discussion went on for about an hour then on the book. The humanities scholar role was to roam through each of the discussion groups as an observer, just to observe what they were talking about, because the scholar already had his or her turn. Their role then was only to observe and then to come back, all of the smaller groups to come back together for a closure, and the humanities scholar would ask each group to report, a major idea or question or 2 major ideas that they had talked about, and then the scholar would offer some closing comments. So these programs occur throughout the state, more often than not in public libraries, but also in university campuses, also in local museums. So more often they're run by the local public librarian, but they also have been run by museum curator or a Friends of the Library head. And they're in small towns, they're in large towns. They tend to do better in small towns because there are fewer programs that are in conflict with your time commitment, and the publicity gets out more readily, perhaps. So you could go to Sayre, Oklahoma. You could go to Hobart, Oklahoma. You could go to Miami. You could go to McAllister. You could go all over. I mean, I have traveled, and I'm not from Oklahoma, and I've learned more about the state of Oklahoma through speaking at over 330 Let's Talk About It evening programs. Back to the discussion the series, there are probably about 40 now series themes that a local group can choose to select for their series. Themes on myth and literature, themes on the American dream, themes on Oklahoma and different aspects of Oklahoma's history, Native Americans. There's a theme on Muslim Americans, African Americans, and actually those different ethnic groups are more often and more successfully included in themes that are not exclusively on one ethnicity, but yet involve reading works of literature with great diversity. There are themes on world literature. The books that seem to work most successfully are works of fiction. If you have a series theme that is filled with historical works, there is generally less engagement, but literature seems to be the means through which, and memoir or autobiography, the means through which people become engaged. And over a series of 5 different readings and 5 different evenings, sometimes they've been during the day in some of the local communities, generally an individual will come to at least 4 of the 5. They may have a conflict one at a time, but there's a tremendous sense of continuity. Some groups will be as small as 10. Some groups will be as large as 80. It really varies depending upon just the, the nature of the community. When you go to, a small community in northwest Oklahoma, you're not going to have 80 people. If you have let's talk about it, in the Center for Interpersonal Studies that I had directed at Oklahoma City University, we would have as many as 80 people come. And Oklahoma State University would also have very large crowds. They were very committed. The Oklahoma State, well, actually it was the Stillwater Public Library, but they would have many faculty people and people that were graduates of OSU come. So you had large groups and small groups. Some of the most exciting places I went to were little small towns that I would never have known about. And maybe I went there 20 years in a row and they became like family. But I think not more interestingly, but some of the rich areas in which, let's talk about it, has expanded is the prisons. I've been to a number of male prisons and female prisons, and I've been to them again and again and again. And I think that's some of the most fulfilling experiences I've had, and let's talk about it. I have found in some of these prisons that the people are as educated and intellectually insightful and curious as any audiences I've ever spoken with. I don't know if that's one reason why they're there. They're so educated, but they're so hungry. They comment. You may want to edit this out eventually, but they comment on the Let's Talk About It humanities programs are so much more valuable than the religious indoctrination programs that they are required to attend. I mean, I've had so many moving things. Your role is never to ask them their name or anything about their history or why they're there or anything like that. But in discussion, most of them know each other and know their histories. And so they talk about their histories. And sometimes then when we're having the food, the snack, the break, some of them will come up to me individually. I'll just give you a couple of anecdotal vignettes. I remember one of the series themes, and Let's Talk About It, is crime and punishment. And some of the book titles include Truman Capote's In Cold Blood, or Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, or Clockwork Orange, titles like that. Ernest Gaines' A Lesson Before Dying, all about individuals in relation either to prison or legal courts. And the comments they make individually about that. One person one time came up to me and said, "Mr. Winn, I'm really afraid when I'm out of prison." I said, "What do you mean?" And she or he said, "Well, I'm not sure I can go home again." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" I think this was after To Kill a Mockingbird. And the person said, "My family are white supremacists, and I am afraid of what they will do to me if I go back home there because I'm no longer a white supremacist." But there would be, not all the time, these kinds of, powerful sharings don't occur every day. That's why they're powerful. But I think the work that Oklahoma Humanities is doing in prisons is just, I wish our legislators would have an appreciation for what that is. And they can't, of course, right now with COVID, they're not able to function. Although some Let's Talk About It programs are continuing on Zoom, but the prisons either don't have the capacity for that, or they don't want the inmates on a platform where they could surf the internet. And I think one thing, Daniel, that is very important to a humanities scholar is you have the opportunity to, my background is modern literature and American literature, but I have the opportunity, and Let's Talk About It, if I'm asked by the local program coordinator to be the scholar on this book, to talk about and research and prepare to share my perspective on a book that I may never have the opportunity to teach. So I think that it is a way that my own professional education has continued. And it certainly is a way back to what I was telling you earlier about graduate school courses or even undergraduate school courses. It is not helpful to speak in jargon, to speak in elaborate language that has been developed to talk about literature at the graduate level. That can be helpful, but if you think that's what talking about literature really is, I think you've lost it. So you have to talk in non-jargon, non-academic ways, and yet implicitly bring the same richness you would to a graduate level course. And so for a scholar to be able to know how to talk to an average person, and by average, I mean, many of the people in the Let's Talk About It programs are far more able to deal with literature than students I have in graduate courses. But I mean, they're doctors, they're lawyers, they're people only with a high school education, they're people that are retired, they're people that have been in business. They have a tremendous, amongst themselves, they have a tremendous wealth of experience that they then share in discussion. Not sure. I've had the opportunity to develop 8 of the themes in Let's Talk About It that are used around the state. Some of the original themes were developed by the American Library Association, I think 5 or 6 in the original training to bring Let's Talk About It programs throughout the states in humanities organizations. And some states have made Let's Talk About It their flagship program. Other states have committed themselves to different programs. Like, for example, the state of Louisiana, their flagship program is called Primetime. And Primetime, actually, I went to a national seminar. Oklahoma Humanities sent us to a national seminar to bring Primetime to Oklahoma. And we tried it for about 5 years, but Oklahoma Humanities could not afford to fund both Let's Talk About It and Primetime. And they chose Let's Talk About It. Louisiana chose Primetime. And Primetime is a humanities program that focuses on elementary age children and their parents. And a librarian and a humanities scholar the librarian will read a book, like a picture book, an illustration book with words, and to demonstrate to parents and to children, you know, how you can make like a call to cut on book, Where the Wild Things Are, come to life in the way you read it. And then the humanities scholar will talk with the children and the parents about themes and ideas within the book. And you're talking both to parents and to children, and you have to find ways to use language so that you reach those different audiences. But one of the goals is to provide parents with an ability to realize the richness of what literature can mean in the way they interact daily with their child. So that's just another program that Oklahoma Humanities has had. Another program they've had too was called Connections. And really that's one of my favorite ones. The Connections was a program, again, American Library Association funded it, and National Endowment for the Humanities funded it. And Oklahoma Humanities sent a group of people to understand and learn about it, to bring it back. I went and I was one of the people, I guess I was the scholar that went. And it was a program focused on bringing literacy to the illiterate. And an illiterate person couldn't read. I don't think they're illiterate in terms of their ability to make meaning, but they don't have the skill of reading. And they would work with a literacy scholar and read like a Newbery Award book, like a young adult reading book or a middle school, high school book. And then we would come together and the humanities scholar would talk about the book, and we would have like a Let's Talk About It discussion, but it would be on a young adult book, and it would be a book that a person that was in literacy courses would have read themselves along with their literacy tutor. And it would have been one of the first books they had ever read. And, you know, there were books like The Odyssey that were included. And again, my experience, like I described to you in prisons or with young children, they were by no means unable to discuss at a deep level. The life experiences, the people, you know, disadvantaged people had not come from a background where reading had been acquired as a skill. They had so many experiences that they shared that they could relate to in some of the books that we read.
Yeah, that's all great information. Yeah, so beyond the Let's Talk About It and those other programs you mentioned, what have your other interactions and relationships with Oklahoma Humanities been?
Well, another program that was is really needed, and it is a program that is in some states, in some humanities councils. In Oklahoma Humanities, we tried it, but it's called Literature in Medicine, and it brought together medical doctors, nurses, in a hospital setting, administrators, staff people, medical ethicists, and it would be like a Let's Talk About It program, like I described earlier, and that would be a series theme, and there would be 5 readings over 5 different, you know, evenings, and it would be 2 hours long, and it would be very similar to Let's Talk About It. The humanities scholar would talk about the book, and then there would be a discussion, and there was a real commitment and understanding that what was said in the room stayed in the room, because you would have people working at the same hospital, and nurses would talk about they had never been able to talk with doctors about issues and ideas. You know, there were questions about the role of the humanities and medicine. We would read books like The Death of Ivan Ilyich by Tolstoy. We would read books that would involve the right to life and the right to death. You know, does a doctor have to always commit herself to saving a person at all costs? Do people have a right to die at a certain point in their suffering? We looked at, for example, Oregon was the first state that had a right to die law. There are about 5 states that do now. But we would deal with medical ethical issues that were very compelling. And the doctors, some of them became very vulnerable and very open, as did some of the nurses. A chaplain would often be there, the chaplains of a hospital. But I had several of those experiences, and again, it's just one of those issues, you know, that it was a program that probably cost $3,000 or $4,000 by the time the books were purchased, by the times, and it included a meal. So at the end of the day, the medical person that worked at the hospital would come and have dinner, and then the process of the discussion would ensue. But you know, it might be $3,000 or $4,000 by the time the books, a stipend to the humanities scholar and the facility. But hospitals just, you know, it wasn't something valuable enough in terms of cost cutting. We need an infusion of the humanities to be valued in our state legislature. That's for you to do in your generation.
Yeah, we'll see. But yeah, any other programs you've been involved with Oklahoma Humanities?
Well, I think that see, I've mentioned the film series. I've mentioned working with young children on the study of humanities and civilizations, the poets, then bringing international speakers like Desmond Tutu or Elie Wiesel, grants in which humanities would provide, you know, a very small percentage of the fee that was required to bring Desmond Tutu from South Africa, say, but primetime, connections, literature, medicine. I think probably those are the major ones. I think Let's Talk About It is the one that bears the most emphasis, since that is the one that Oklahoma Humanities has committed most of their energy to over the years. They also worked with Poetry Out Loud, which is a program in which high school students memorize poems and read them. And then there's a contest at the state level, and then it goes to the national level, like a national spelling bee, where you are able to read a poem out loud in a very powerful and persuasive, or just an eloquent way, the way that you think the poem should be read. And the way you read a poem is an act of interpretation. So that was another program, Poetry Out Loud, which is a national program. I think it overlies, it connects with National Endowment for the Arts as well as the National Endowment for the Humanities.
Okay, so we're getting close to the 1 hour mark. So as a sort of wrapping up point, I'd just like to give you the floor to talk about anything that you haven't regarding Oklahoma Humanities or just the humanities in general.
Well, I think one thing I would talk about, and this could happen in a number of different programs, but it particularly is the Let's Talk About program is very open to this kind of possibility, intergenerational communities. Some of the most interesting Let's Talk About programs, I've said that several times, with prisons and others, but one of the most interesting kinds of Let's Talk About programs I have done is when a local librarian and a high school, probably an honors teacher or a high school librarian, would collaborate together. And you would have high school, generally, I think probably always juniors and seniors in high school, probably honors students, fortunately or unfortunately, but they would come together with the local community people and talk. So you would have 70 and 80-year-old people in the same room as a 17 or 18-year-old, and talking about books that the 70-year-old might wonder if the 17-year-old should be allowed to read that book. And the high schools, of course, had to have letters from parents to give their son or daughter permission to read a book that the Oklahoma school board probably wouldn't allow to be taught in a high school course. But that intergenerational connectivity of an English teacher's students coming together, or an English or a high school librarian coming together with a public librarian to do a program. And some of the discussion leaders would be students, and some of the discussion leaders would be, community people of 40, 50, or 60 years old. And just the getting together, that intergenerational community. I just don't think we have the vision yet to realize what could happen if we would fund programs that brought people together of different backgrounds, different age groups. I think that's something that the humanities can still mine and explore much more than it has been able to do, but its ability to do so always depends on its funding. And every year, I shouldn't say every year, and I don't want to leave the realm of the humanities, but there are always some people who at the national level in Congress or in the White House who threaten the existence of the National Endowment for the Humanities, to cut off its funding entirely. And fortunately, both in Oklahoma and outside of Oklahoma, there always have been enough elected representatives or senators that threat has been met successfully. But it's still an issue. I mean, that the humanities, I remember once, and I don't know what it is right now, this was probably 20 years ago, the city of Berlin funds what the National Endowment for the Humanities does and what the National Endowment for the Arts does. Those two national organizations. The city of Berlin funds 5 times more than the country of the United States does for the National Endowment for the Humanities and the National Endowment for the Arts. And so I think one of the real challenges is to, the enthusiasm and the life experience I've had with Oklahoma Humanities to find ways to communicate that to people who have the purse strings or the ability to, so much more could be done. You see, I've mentioned many programs, and most of them, Oklahoma Humanities has not been able to continue because of lack of funding and lack of personnel. So I think we've only touched, that old metaphor of the tip of the iceberg in relation to what a state and a national humanities commitment could be. The humanities has often emphasized civility in communication, in discussion, and certainly we know today how important it is, or at least we're beginning to realize how important it is to have civil discourse. And I think the Oklahoma Humanities are it's not the only, but it's one of the major ways that we could approach that fundamental issue within our constitutional government. How to civilly discuss and to expose yourself to ideas that perhaps are foreign to you. And to learn to realize that you can be receptive to them, or you can disagree with them, but importantly, when you've understood them. I'm not sure if you want to prompt me on other topics you think we haven't dealt with.
Oh no, that sounded great. Yeah, we've run pretty up close against the 1 hour goal for the interview. So if you don't have any other thoughts that you feel, are pressing on your mind, we can wrap this up.
I guess if I would close with an exhortation that there have been many evenings when I will have ultimately, by the time I get back to my home, have had a 4-hour round trip drive, to southeastern or southwestern or northwestern Oklahoma, and for a 2-hour program. And I sometimes wonder, why in Hades am I doing this? Because it's a 6-hour commitment, but you've had to prepare in advance and you have to recover afterwards. But I think almost without exception, that drive home, that 2-hour drive home, or 1.5-hour drive home, or whatever the geographical distance was, I drive home elated. I drive home with a humanities high. I'm so glad I agreed to go to this location. Though it took me 2 hours to get there and 2 hours to get back. Sometimes on very cold nights with some snow, sometimes, that kind of thing. It has been something that has enriched my life. And I've met so many people involved in the humanities program work that have been equivalently impacted and impact me with their vision and their commitment.
Yeah, that all sounds great. All right. So,
what is your major?
I am currently majoring in chemistry and history.
Wonderful combination.
Yeah. The history is a bit of a recent addition, but I've always enjoyed history. So I was minoring in it before, so I just transitioned it into a major alongside chemistry.
Help you be able to communicate maybe more the chemical principles, or the chemical principles may help you be more fact-based in trying to support your historical observations.
Yeah, there's a pretty good amount of overlap between the like thought processes of STEM and humanities.
Yes.
So, it's nice to be able to explore that a little bit.
If we could have an equivalent emphasis on the humanities as we do on STEM, we'd be a richer country.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. But yeah, thank you so much for doing this today.
Well, thank you for this work that you're doing.
Yeah, it's really enjoyable, actually.
Good.
I found that I enjoy these interviews a lot. It's great hearing people's stories and their thoughts and everything that they've done.
Well, thank you again.